I'm Joanne Darcy, and you're listening to High Performance Woman Podcast, where we're elevating stories of high performance women from across the globe. Here's what we have coming up for you today.
It's like high performance for me is knowing how far I can push myself. That's a privilege. Not everyone can choose to do that. And there have been some phenomenal girls within our teams that have put a lot at risk to do it. But I suppose some of us are in better positions that it's not as risky and we can make those decisions and not be under as much stress. You know, it's brand new and we're still figuring it out. And I think, in fairness to the IRFU, they're doing a pretty good job of figuring it out relatively quickly. And it may have taken a long time to get to this point, but we're here now and it's pretty fantastic. Like, it's pretty phenomenal. There's a long way to go, but they are pretty good at acknowledging that as well. That was the start of what felt like the end, and I didn't get picked for 15s again in that period. Just get girls playing. The more athletic and the more involved in teams or individual sports, but the community of sport in general, the better. Because that's, like, you see loads of men's players, you know, they had really successful careers as GAA players, and then they just chose rugby because they were supported in their athletic development, supported in how to be a really high achieving athlete.
And probably felt that connection that you described earlier as well.
Such a huge connection piece. Their identity is being kind of, you know, reinforced all the time, and there's a space for them, and there's never any question of, well, what's the next step, because it's so clear. And that doesn't mean there's not hardship. Like, there's so many disappointments. I'm sure there's tenfold disappointed men's players as there is women's players, because there's 10 times the competition. But the difference is the pathway and the platforms are there for them. If they again hit the right timing and don't end up competing at the exact same time as like the best player in the world or whatever it is, there is no reason that they shouldn't get to an elite level. Whereas you have girls that they might want to play rugby still in this country and it's not possible in their local community. Pathways are coming along big time. We have these kind of structures for girls to play in now, which is huge. They didn't exist 15 years ago. So we are coming on leaps and bounds, and it's fantastic. Like, put yourself into scenarios where you are surrounded by people that you want to be like, or who are aspiring to achieve the same things as you are, and who are willing to put in the same work.
Today's guest is Irish Professional Rugby Player Deirbhile Nic A Bhaird. Deirbhile has been part of the IRFU setup now for over 6 years, having played 7s and now 15s. She also plays for Munster and her club Old Belvedere. Passionate about the Irish language, a fluent Irish speaker. Derv is also a rugby analyst and commentator on TG Cahir. And highly educated, I don't know where to begin, an undergraduate degree, 2 master's degree, and is currently on a 1-year break from her PhD. So incredible achievements. I think too many to mention. There's some there that I haven't even mentioned. So I think for 28 years, that's phenomenal in terms of achievements already. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
And secondly, I'm very, very happy to have you here on High Performance Women Podcast.
Yeah, delighted to be here. Thanks for having me. Yeah, it's funny hearing some of the education stuff back. It sounds maybe a little bit more glamorous than it is, or something. I don't know. It's like nice to have it, and then I don't think about it for so much of the year as well. So it's kind of strange having it in the back pocket almost. And
you've the very different areas from your undergraduate degree to your masters, your 2 masters, and then into your PhD. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I guess I understand the progression of them, because I kind of built it relatively intentionally. I suppose they grew out of each other more so, but the original undergrad was in product design and technology in UL, and that came out of, I guess, I didn't really know what I wanted to do in secondary school, but I knew I liked making things and I liked solving problems, and I didn't really have an interest in traditional, I suppose, workplace environments. I guess I didn't really want to be in an office. I wanted to be creative. Like, I did art and woodwork, and was always involved in sort of making in school in different capacities. And through doing whatever it was, research in the CAO, like, product design seemed like a really strange, kind of nebulous course, but it was absolutely perfect for me. And I got extremely lucky with like the different tutors and stuff I had in that course as well, and the different people that I met in terms of my classmates. But yeah, that's what they called us in the end. Like, instead of a product designer, you were a problem solver. That was what the degree was in. So we got taught how to solve problems across various different industries and apply kind of a specific style of thinking to problems, as opposed to being very analytical or whatever it might be. So I got into, I guess, looking at digital spaces through that. And the masters I did, I took a year after the undergrad, I think, and then got into the masters in creative digital media. So that was user experience design and interaction design. So again, focusing on digital products, which I think just made sense to me in terms of what spaces are opening up and what people spend most of their time on now, which is in later years that I've realized that I hate that. Like, and I'm terrified of it. But I think instead of trying to, go against it, you look at ways to make it better, so that if we're going to keep using them, and I'm not anti-technology, that's not the point, and I'm not anti-phone, but definitely looking at how they can be better and healthier, I think, because they're going to be part of our lives. So that was sort of the jump there.
It's interesting just on both of those, so that you made the decision on what to do based on what you enjoyed as opposed to the end goal, and then went into a master's where you fine-tuned it but said that it's nearly like didn't like a direction that something was going in, so lean into it, get in the inside, and then try and make positive improvements. It's really interesting that the decision making process that you made there.
I think it's that phrase of like, go with the flow, it's kind of I've always found it interesting of if you're in tough situations, going with the flow is challenging, but if you pick an easier flow, it's always going to be nicer to be in it. So I'm probably a little bit wicked for picking things that I know I'll be good at, or I know I have a natural talent towards, but it just makes sense to me. Like, if you're not enjoying something, and that doesn't mean like you don't pick challenging stuff. I think there's always going to be hard things, and there was hard elements of those courses and hard elements of the decision making around going into them. But I know that the backbone of it is that it's something I enjoy doing, and I enjoy the people that I meet in those spaces as well. I think we have a particular way of maybe thinking about problems with a kind of wider view of them. And that was definitely something that I've found through both.
I think it's like strengths-based decision making.
Yeah,
like
100%.
We can spend our whole lives, and particularly, I think it is evolving, but focusing on our weaknesses, focusing on our gaps, our areas for improvement. Yeah. But actually, if we put all of our attention into our strengths, it just makes perfect sense.
You make them your like superpowers, as opposed to, you don't. I think there's a really good phrase, a piece of advice that we were given in sport all the time is, you improve your weaknesses, you perfect your strengths. You're never going to perfect your weaknesses realistically. Like, they're natural ability pieces, but there's some stuff that you're going to be naturally better at, and it makes sense to go with those. It's something you're going to enjoy because you're naturally good at it. Like, do the stuff that makes sense, and there's, again, like, obviously have to pick the weaknesses up and try and make yourself more rounded, but it's okay to acknowledge that they're not your strengths as well, and not try to be the best at absolutely everything, but be really good at what you want to be really good at.
Yeah, I love that. Improve your weaknesses, perfect your strengths. Yeah, that's part of it. That's such a good analogy for life, definitely.
I think so. Seems to be sort of working so far. I'm not sure.
And you moved into philosophy, the Masters of Philosophy.
So that was, I guess, the next jump. So I'd always been interested, like, product and product design is essentially a question of how do people use things, and not only that, but the full circle of that is how do the things that we use affect us in the kind of cyclical manner. So we use stuff on a day-to-day basis, which has an impact on how we live our lives, and then in turn we choose things that will have an impact on how we live our lives. So some of it is like decision making. You decide to use this thing, therefore it does this task for you or whatever. And then other parts of it are, okay, I have my phone and it affects my life in such and such a way that I amn't aware of. And for me, that was the piece that that really, as I went through my education and some work experience, that was the bit I found most fascinating, is what is going on under the surface that one motivates people and their behaviors, but also what are we not even aware of that is influencing us. And especially in digital spaces and digital product design, there is so much going on that we just don't understand, because it's happening so quickly, and the developments in tech are happening faster than any of us will be able to keep up with. So then I try to figure out, I suppose, where is the biggest point of influence? And the biggest point of influence is if you shape the product before the products start shaping us, and then we work reflexively to try and fix those things, as opposed to setting them up in such a way as that they're healthy from the outset, or healthier from the outset.
An example of one of those
products. For example, Google Maps.
Okay.
Right. So Google Maps, it's one a lecturer kind of brought to our attention before. So there's algorithms at play in Google Maps that tell you about where things are within a city and the most popular things in a city. And those things will always come up on top of a list. So they're popular for a reason. Okay, fair enough. But because they're at the top of the list, they get more popular. So people visit those more often. So yes, you're getting a recommendation based off what's popular, and that's great. So you get to see the coolest thing. But you miss out on a load of other stuff because this is just the easiest thing to find. Yeah. And now it has an influence on your life, because you might be missing out on a load of stuff that's, under 10 on the list. Yeah. But then that also has an impact on the city and like a tourism industry and the people that run other businesses. And now it becomes it's not about making your business better, it's about making your business higher on the list. And obviously, better business gets higher up.
Yeah, it's like the focus is on the wrong thing then. It's nearly like Spotify, where it's telling you what your favourite songs are, and then you're listening to them more. So actually, rather than broadening the scope of what you're listening to, it's actually narrowing the scope. And
100%.
Yeah, it's amazing actually to reflect on that.
Yeah. It has such an impact. I mean, like, the thing that I'm most interested in at the moment, and that the PhD is in, is looking at how digital communication influences our, I guess, the quality of communication that we're having, but especially like the kind of target research group for me is children, really young children primarily, because kids are using phones at 3. They're probably actually using them before that,
even earlier,
tablets,
probably,
whatever it is. But by the time they're really understanding communications through their digital devices, like, actually it is probably earlier. I haven't delved into exactly what point yet, but I think that's going to be, or for me, that's one of the most important and frightening developments in tech at the moment, is it's a completely different language. So like, we're speaking in English or whatever the person's primary language is for their communications, but it's in a completely different medium. It's taken away from the body entirely. And like, kids haven't even learned how to communicate face to face or person to person or multiple people to just them. And now we're expecting them to learn a completely different vocabulary, style of communication, like different methods of communication that are just popping up differently all the time, without having any clue. Like, we know it's affecting multiple generations already. Like, teenagers are struggling with it. Adults are struggling with it in the same way. Social media on top of that is like its own huge black hole. But even the basics of like text messaging, any text-based communication, there's a sort of alienation, for me anyway, or that's what my research is looking into, from the way the body experiences communication and how you relate to other people. And I see the digital space being a huge factor in how that, or how people develop around communication now in the future, especially this, like, I suppose, the last 5-6 years of kids that are using digital tech, digital comms from infancy. Like,
and there's so little we know. It's fascinating research. Look forward to seeing it. I think similarly to what you described earlier on, you seem to be going on the inside and being able to change for the better.
That's the plan.
By being the expert and looking at how we can improve things. So that's really, really admirable.
That's the plan. I think it's probably going to be a challenging research project in some ways, in that it's going to be very much like, I'm not a psychologist by trade, so to a degree my results will be indicative of where we should be looking. Or that's what I envisage it to be at the moment, that I could highlight what I see as trends, or areas of interest based off of, you know, interviews with kids, focus groups with kids about what they're experiencing.
Yeah.
And then hopefully somebody that has a little bit more or a lot more experience in that area or qualification in that area can take it and
Can kind of build on that.
Yeah.
No, that's really, really fascinating stuff. In terms of your rugby career, tell me, what does it take to be an Ireland professional rugby player?
That's a big question.
Break it down into smaller pieces.
I guess, like, I suppose so many of my teammates and myself have had different journeys to it, and the generations of players before me who I guess would have inspired me and taken me under their wing, they had completely different journeys as well. So I suppose in terms of the ladder or what the steps are varies massively. But what does it take? I guess dedication is probably the big one. Resilience for sure, like an ability to get knocked down and get back up. And then at the core of it, being competitive, but enjoying the sport and enjoying competing. I think those two go hand in hand with every athlete that's in the space. That I think especially the ones that do particularly well, they've got to love competing. Yeah, got to love pushing yourself, and it's not just competing with others; it's competing with yourself, because there's a lot of, even in a team environment, there's a lot of training that is just on you. So you got to be disciplined around almost, you know, flipping the mindset. So sometimes it's real challenging to go out on a dark day, raining, muck, like the worst of the worst. Christmas days spent out running, like all that sort of stuff. I have found it challenging over the years, but I've finally, I think, got a handle on the mindset of it's an opportunity. It's an absolute joy when you get to put it out on the pitch at the end of all that work. Yeah. So it's like looking at it optimistically, I guess. Yeah. So it's a mindset thing for sure, if that kind of sums it up.
Yeah, and I mean, as you mentioned, everybody's journey is different. So what has your journey been to get into this point?
I guess I've been playing at like senior level for just over 10 years now. Even in this space of time, things have changed so dramatically. So when I started playing rugby at under 12 with a boys team, just because the lads in my school at the time, they were all involved in the rugby club up the road, and like, you know, I spent all my lunchtimes playing soccer with these lads, and those soccer matches often ended up turning into semi-rugby matches, you know. So it just felt like a natural progression to go up to the rugby club as well. And rugby was always a thing in my household. My mum is a devout Munster fan. Okay. And it just, it was never a question of maybe not, you know. It was the second I wanted to do it, I went. Played under 12s for like 2 years or whatever it was, and then wasn't allowed anymore.
So you played under 12s on the boys team?
Yeah, there was no girls team.
Okay, and was there other girls that played on that team as well?
Or? Not at the time, no. Okay, I think there were obviously other girls playing around the country and stuff, but it definitely wasn't well established. And yeah, so then I think it's still the same. Girls can't play with boys past under 14, just like it's not safe, essentially, is the argument, and it's not insurable. So I had to stop playing, and I was sad at the time, but like I went off and played every other sport under the sun that I could for whatever it was, 6 years. And then I turned 18 the September of my final year in school, and I was out playing rugby. I think I had a maths mock exam or something. I was playing rugby the day before, just after turning 18. Like the second I could get into it, I was in it.
And you had to wait till you were 18 to be able to join a senior team?
Yeah, because I probably could have gone down to a club as a 16, 17-year-old and been involved in training a little bit, but you wouldn't have been allowed to do contact, wouldn't have been allowed to play matches. So I think at the time my other sports were probably, I could compete in them, so it made more sense. But like I was always an avid rugby fan, so it was always part of my life. And then, I got playing. So that would have been the summer of like 2014 or something. So it was weird. I guess I was quite athletic from having played so many other sports along the way. And I had a combination of like Gaelic football, boxing, jiu-jitsu, and and soccer kind of all mixed in there, and they lent themselves to rugby. The combinations, like it was quite a physical player in all of those other sports, probably to my detriment at times. But I managed to play a season with Highfield senior ladies, and then that summer got selected for Munster, and through, I suppose, just me getting lucky and other people getting unlucky, I got to start that season as well. So probably or definitely wouldn't happen now, or there's far higher levels of competition now, I would say. But I kind of got fast tracked into senior interpro rugby anyway. And obviously it's quite different. It's not the same as the men's game at all. We have 3 games, maybe 4 games a year at interpro. You train for like 2-3 months for that short window of competition. Okay. But it was really, really exciting. I think like I had been down to watch Munster games my entire life, and then to be able to pull on the jersey was pretty phenomenal. And it was with a lot of my teammates from Highfield as well. That's one of the nice things about the women's game. It's still so small that like majority of us playing club, you will end up playing with your club mate when you get to interpro, and very good chance you'll end up playing with them when you get to national level as well. So you always have those connections kind of the whole way along. And then from Munster, I guess it was a couple of years playing Munster and club, and then I think it was in the lead up to the 2017 World Cup, or maybe the Six Nations just before that. So it was the home World Cup that the girls played in 2017. I actually emailed the head coach. One of the girls put me forward for that, or gave me his contact details to just put myself forward. And I actually offered to go watch their sessions and run water for them if they wanted, just because they were training in UL at the time and I was studying there. And one of the girls said, you should just email him. Just see if you can come watch our sessions, like get your name in his head. And I did. And in fairness to Tom, at the time, he said, come down to the session. And I didn't genuinely thought that I was just coming down to watch. But he threw me into it and ran the absolute legs off me. And it was a fairly wild introduction to it. I'd had a little bit of exposure to sevens prior to that. I was up on a trial with them in my first year in UL for like 5-6 months. Didn't make it that time round, but then like 15s was kind of my passion anyway. Sevens was just, I suppose, an amazing opportunity to possibly play pro. It was the only professional rugby for women, or I think possibly the only professional sport for women at the time. Or team sport anyway. Kind of like an unusual, chaotic start to it. And then I got into an actual 15s panel in the lead up to the Six Nations before that home World Cup. Played a challenge game against Wales. I came down heavy on my elbow, and they sent me for a scan. Fractured. Turns out actually 6 weeks later when they reviewed the scan, that was never fractured at all, but I had missed out on selection at that point. Wow. That was a bit of a nightmare. And then I moved over to England to play with Harlequins for a season. And when I came back from that, I got a call. I'd been dropped from the World Cup squad actually just before that, or in the interim. It was kind of like playing with Quins, sort of in with Ireland, got dropped from Ireland, back to Quins, might have had a broken elbow, actually wasn't broken.
How do you deal with all that? I mean, that just sounds like a huge amount of uncertainty, disappointment, highs, massive highs, and then like really low lows, excuse me. Yeah. How do you deal with that, or how were you feeling at the time?
I think I was so, like, I was super competitive, always been super competitive, but I think I was so in shock that I was there, already. Like, now I wanted to be there, and I was driven to the point of, like, madness about, doing everything I could to be there. And looking back on it now, I was really young and quite immature in a lot of ways. So I now I'm doing a lot more, but in a less kind of frantic way. But the highs and lows, I guess I just knew what I wanted, so it didn't really matter. Like, they were disappointing, and I don't know if I always dealt with those disappointments the best way I could. I definitely didn't, in fact, but I guess I just was so hell-bent on making that team, it didn't really matter.
So you didn't really dwell on it at the time, you kind of kept going?
I probably did, but I would say more that it fueled my desire to keep going rather than like it definitely was. They were knocks. They were like, especially that one, the run up to the World Cup. It was a home World Cup. It was like not my first involvement with Ireland, but like I was closer that time than I had been before. I think I got dropped like the last or second last camp before that World Cup. Now I was like 19, 20. I think, you know, I knew it a lot more to go, and it was girls from the sevens team at the time that came in and took that position, or like, well, that I would have been competing with at the time as a winger, and I knew they were better than me, which was frustrating, and I'm sure at the time I probably had loads of reasons in my head as to why I was actually better, but in the end they were deserving of their spots. But then I spent that period of time watching all those games as a spectator, and I suppose so many of my friends or idols were on the pitch, and I did get to watch them, and there was, you know, huge benefits to that too as a learning curve.
It's your mindset is amazing in terms of how you can take that and, you know, fuel it to drive you further. And I know that you're passionate about high performance and leadership. What does high performance mean to you?
Yeah, it's interesting. We've been working on this a lot within the 15s program now. It's professional a year and a half, I think. So it's still new, and a lot of the girls are coming to terms, I suppose, with being professional athletes, and we do a lot of work on high performance and with our performance lead, Sean Ryan. And it's a really interesting question, and one that I've had to challenge a lot of my own biases on, I guess. For me, high performance is striving to achieve, and it's doing all of the basics around what it's going to take to get there and more. So it's being accountable and having a really, really good understanding of yourself, I think, is the thing that I'm coming to realize. Like, high performance for me is knowing how far I can push myself, and that there's a lot of different elements to that, I suppose.
What are they? What are those elements?
How far I can push myself is understanding, I suppose, reality of what am I actually capable of. So I don't necessarily think potential is limitless. Like, I think there's
really interesting.
Huge potential in so many people, but there are factors that, you know, limit it too.
What would they be? I think there's many different viewpoints about nature versus nurture, about everybody is coachable, about potential with the right mindset. Like, what are those
Everybody's
limitations?
not coachable. I tell you that. I guess, well, like for sport, like there's physical limitations to a degree, and you can work around them. You can find the thing that you're best at and make that, like I said earlier on, it can compensate for some of the weaknesses. But there's some things sometimes where someone's just faster than you, or someone's just better than you at a skill, or someone's just a super talented athlete, and you've hit the timing wrong, where very unfortunately that superstar is alive at the same time that you're alive, and there's almost nothing you can do to get around that. There are other, I suppose, limiting factors in, like, resources, maybe, like that can be a factor. For sure, I think that's something that I've become maybe more aware of in the last couple of years, of like, I'm very lucky to have come from a very privileged background where, like, my parents were able to give me ample time growing up. I always had jobs here and there working, and like I liked working, but I never had to. So there was an awareness there of like, I could choose to not work for a summer because I knew that I had lots of matches coming up, or I had opportunities. Like, I worked on farms, and I was very lucky to be given that job as well, but I really enjoyed it. But it also meant that my timetabling was relatively flexible. I could train full time, more or less, if I wanted to. And I suppose, you know, it might not be a potential question, but not everybody is that lucky. You know, some people have to work full time alongside whatever they're doing. Even like the limitations of like living in Dublin on a semi-professional contract and getting to focus on your rugby full time, like, that's a privilege. Not everyone can choose to do that, and there have been some phenomenal girls within our teams that have put a lot at risk to do it, but I suppose some of us are in better positions that it's not as risky, and we can make those decisions and not be under as much stress. So I think those are factors in it. Yeah.
Just one question I wanted to ask you, but you've brought it up now, is in terms of those risks and sacrifices, for people that may not understand the setup from the women's game, maybe you can explain a little bit about that in terms of how that's set up, and then I suppose explain some of those sacrifices that either you've seen other people make or that you've made yourself throughout your career.
Yeah, it's a kind of interesting one. I think it's something that it's scarier and at a bigger scale in the women's game, I think, in the sense that like our professional contracts are not as competitive as the men's, and it's only, it's brand new and we're still figuring it out. And I think, in fairness to the IRFU, they're doing a pretty good job of figuring it out relatively quickly, and it may have taken a long time to get to this point, but we're here now, and it's pretty fantastic. Like, it's pretty phenomenal. There's a long way to go, but they are pretty good at acknowledging that as well.
And you've been part of, I suppose, the before, during and after now in terms of what the future looks like. So
and it's all going in the right direction. I guess I'm sure I'm going to look back after I retire at what the girls have at that point and go, heck, I wish I had that. But equally, I look back on the girls before me that were doing way more, and I don't know how they sustained it. Like, I really don't. Like, people getting up at 4:30 to get to the gym at 5 so that they could be in work at 7:30 or 8, going to work for a full day, and like, taxing careers, and then going training in the evenings, finding jobs that were flexible enough to allow them to take huge amounts of time off work for camp, running the risk of getting injured in a training or in a match and not being able to work. And like, not every employer is that flexible or that empathetic, I suppose. And they were doing it for nothing. It actually cost a lot of them to play. And then, I guess, sorry, I'm coming away from the question again. What was it?
Yeah, no, just in terms of the setup of the ladies now, and the sacrifices and risks that come with that.
Yeah, so the setup now is we're full-time professional, more or less. We train 4 days a week, matches at the weekend, depending on the time of the season. And then it's kind of a mix of things. So we have some contracted girls in the centrally contracted program, or the centralised program as we call it. Then you have girls that are in Ireland but aren't centralised. So they're non-contracted athletes that still represent Ireland but play for their clubs and work externally to rugby. And then you have a lot of girls in our setup anyway who are living in England and playing in England. And basically the Premiership rugby over there, their club setup is elite. It's very well established at this point. You have incredibly high quality games, and in a lot of those fixtures you're looking at 2 starting 15s that would be majority internationals or close to international, whereas the club game here is a little less developed, considerably less developed, but also the player pool is a lot smaller. So the AIL would be the top competition for club players, and then the Interpro is run during or just after the club season, and that basically players from their clubs go on to their interprovincial sides, Ulster, Connacht, Ulster, Leinster, and we play generally 3 or 4 games in that series each summer or December, January kind of time. Typically the progression is you go club, do really well in club, get selected for your Interpro side, try and do really well there, then get selected for Ireland. We now have a new competition which is running the last 2 years called the Celtic Challenge. So that is a sort of next step from Interpro, or that's how it's being kind of laid out, where it's a combined 2 teams, the Clovers, who are Connacht and Munster combined, and then Leinster and Ulster combined to make the Wolfhounds. And I suppose that's another step up from Interpro. They are playing an international tournament against 2 squads from Edinburgh and Glasgow, and then 2 Welsh teams as well. So it's kind of, I suppose the idea is that it's bridging the gap between Interpro and International.
Yeah.
Because Interpro is probably a little bit underdeveloped in comparison to the club scene in England.
There's a huge amount in that.
There's a
in
lot
terms
there,
of your commitments, like they're plentiful.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
And I suppose over the years, Deirbhile, like what has been your biggest struggle or biggest thing that you've had to face and get through?
Yeah. I suppose for me personally, my career has been a little bit up and down. Well, very up and down. So I played sevens for, I think I was in the program for just under 5 years, or around the 5 years mark. For that, so that's like 5 seasons of rugby. I think I went into it with a huge amount of optimism, and I thought it was, at the time, some sevens players would cross over to 15s, and I always wanted to be a 15s player. Like, I loved 15s. I loved the Irish team. Again, so many of my heroes were in that squad, so that was kind of my motivation. I wanted to play sevens, I wanted to play for Ireland, and I wanted to be really good. But I also had the dream of playing in a 15s World Cup, and that's still always been my goal. I think behind everything is I want to be not only playing it, but I want to be a competitor at a 15s World Cup. And sevens, my career there was mixed. I had 2 seasons, or at least 1 season, where I felt like I was competing. And then most of the rest of the time, I was a bench player, if even. So the way sevens works is a lot of tournaments you'll bring 13 players, or at the time it was you brought 13 players to, you might go away for a week, 2 weeks at a time. And at some stage during the week, the coach would tell the 13th player who they were and that they weren't going to be playing for the weekend. Okay. I had 2 seasons where that was me, like the majority of the time. Yeah. And that was hard. And I guess on reflection, at the time I felt that I was being hard done by on a number of those occasions. And I didn't see how I could progress, because I felt that I was competitive. And, you know, some of it was, I think, coaches and me not fitting with a coach's view of how we wanted to play. Yeah. A lot of it was my own skills not being good enough, probably not being as fit as I needed to be, and they were some controllables that I think, looking back on it now, was probably, you know, like an older, more experienced athlete, there are things I probably look back on with some regrets, but I definitely feel like at the time the environment just wasn't one that I was going to thrive in.
And what changed then to, I suppose, bring your career on that upward spiral?
Yeah, weirdly, retiring. So I left the sevens program after, I think I spent the bones of a year, like killing myself over the decision, and it was really tough. I was in a more or less full-time program. I was getting educated at the same time, so I was in one of the master's programs at the time, and I just remember thinking I was under so much pressure. And then I started working alongside it, because I kind of knew sevens wasn't going where I needed it to be going, to feel like it was like, you know, this is the end of like 5 years, and you're kind of investing a huge amount of time and thinking, am I getting any closer to any of my goals? And I actually felt that I was getting further away, because in the earlier stages of my sevens career, I was in and out of 15s as well. And I actually got my first 15s cap off the back of a sevens tournament that I was playing in, that I did get to play in, Sydney 2018, I think. I was in Sydney on the Sunday. We came 4th. It was a fairly heartbreaking moment. We were so close and yet so far. And then we were all really struggling. And on the Tuesday morning, we had the flight that evening. Sorry, the Monday morning, we had the flight that evening. Our coach at the time came up to me and was like, how do you feel about going into 15s camp on Wednesday?
And did they know at the time that you were planning on retiring?
No, this was much earlier. I retired in 2021 or 22, I think. Yeah. No, I was still fairly gutsy at this stage. Yeah, definitely. But I think I got back the Wednesday morning and was training with the 15s the Wednesday night. Flew out and played Scotland on the Saturday, and that was my first 15s cap. And at the time, I felt like, okay, I'm closer to at least one dream, at least. And then the following season, we had a change in coaches. I fell out of favour big time. That was the start of what felt like the end. And I didn't get picked for 15s again in that period. It was almost 2.5, 3 years, I think, maybe a bit less. And I just felt like everything was, like I was still working really hard. Like that was the thing. You don't really stop. Because I think the second you stop, you feel like, well, it's all gone anyway. So you're really, really trying. It doesn't feel like it's in your control to a degree, and I just wasn't enjoying it. Like I really wasn't enjoying it, and eventually came to the decision to take a year at least out. At the time I was telling myself I was retiring, I was so sick of it. I was so sick of just getting nowhere and feeling like I had no options. And I think the thing that was really killing me was I wasn't being selected for tournaments. And even though we're training all the time and you have loads of opportunities to compete every day, I wasn't allowed to play. So I wasn't being released to play any 15s. I wasn't playing in sevens tournaments.
So you were stuck essentially in terms of mentally not enjoying it and not seeing any progress.
And no, and that's the thing. And I've said this to so many coaches over the years. Like, if you're going to have players that are in that kind of space in between, you got to find them game time.
Yeah.
That's where we get our buzz. That's the addictive part for me. It's like there's all the little bits along the way that are really fun, and you push yourself really hard. Like the gym stuff is great. Pushing yourself in fitness is great. Well, I think that now. I didn't think it at the time, but
it's not fueling your competitive spirit.
Just doesn't.
You know, there's only so long you can compete against yourself, I suppose. Yeah.
So that I think was the turning point for me. I realised, like, I just haven't played in so long. Not consistently. I don't get to show what I'm capable of, and I felt like I was capable of more than what people were seeing in me.
And when you decided to step away then and take your year or more, what happened?
So I went back to playing club a little bit. I took a proper break, a couple of months. Then I got into, I think I was asked to come back to Interpro to play with Munster, and, you know, look, I kind of couldn't say no. I found that, like, I tried really hard to say no, but I just couldn't do it. And I had been telling people all along, no, I'm not doing that. I promise you I'm not doing that. And I was so adamant, but like I couldn't turn it down when I got the opportunity, and was playing club alongside that. And I think the thing for me was I found a connection to the community again, big time. So that was one of the parts of rugby that I loved the most at the start, was I had found a space that I could be really myself in. Probably because, like, a lot of the girls that play are nutters. Like, they're really wild characters, you know, and it was so fun. And you play a sport where you're literally lining yourself up to get milled by people. Like,
but I suppose what you're describing there is all of a sudden you're connected. You're part of a team again, and what you'd been describing previously felt quite lonely. It did. That you were competing against yourself. You felt like you were getting nowhere, and all of a sudden then you feel connection. And you start to flourish.
Big time. Yeah. I think that's the tricky part with team sport as well, is that, like, you're in a team, so you can't, or you should be trying to do everything you can to support the team, but there's a competitive element to every individual that, like, if that's not being fed, it's very hard to stay positive. It's very hard to be that person that's just putting in the graft to hold a tackle bag, essentially. But when I got back to Belvo and to Munster, in fairness, and especially Belvo, I suppose, because it was where I was living, like, we travelled from Munster, so you're not necessarily in the community as much, but being back in the club was huge. Like, I'd stayed connected to the club to a degree, but, like, probably not as much as I should have. And that would be, I suppose, coming to a later piece, like, the advice I would give: stay connected to the people that support you. And they did. Like, they were incredible. I like the amount of support and just crack that I had playing again. And there wasn't as much pressure. It was like, you know, like, we went out every weekend. Everybody knew that you were trying your best. There was, I suppose, like, I was getting selected. I was playing 80 minutes of rugby every weekend. It was always going to be more fun.
So you're just feeling fulfilled and satisfied and connected.
Yeah. And then I think having that bit in, like, the foundation again, and the enjoyment of it just made me play better.
Yeah, it's nearly like it feels your flow state.
100%. Yeah, 100%. And, like, there's less, I suppose, anxiety around not making it. And I took that anxiety away from myself for a while, where I had told myself, like, I'm not going to make it anyway. So it's kind of just get back to competing, feeling like a good player. because for a long time I didn't feel like a good player, and the knock-on effect of that was like I really plummeted self-worth wise, like because I'd attached so much to my dream in rugby, and who I was as a player was what I saw as who I was,
Your identity was completely
Big
wrapped
time,
up in that.
yeah.
And how is that for you now? Because I mean, obviously your career really grew in a positive way, and now for the last 4 months, as you were explaining, you're injured.
Yeah.
So that must be a challenge in terms of what you described there. Like when your whole identity is wrapped up in something, you're doing really, really
Yeah.
well, and all of a sudden, bang.
Yeah, definitely. Literally bang. Yeah, I suppose off the back of that 2 seasons, so I had a really good season with Munster following that, and I got selected for Ireland again, and it was terrifying, I think, because I had done this all before. I knew that it was just within my grasp and that I could potentially get there, and it still wouldn't be enough. And I think in terms of the identity piece, I had parked that, or I had tried really hard to park it.
How do you park that? Like, I mean, even for, we're talking about rugby and specifics about rugby today, but you can relay that to parenthood. You could relate that to life in the corporate world, a job. You could relate it to a hobby. You could relate it to your status in the community if that's taken away. Like, so how do you separate that? Because it's very difficult, I think, for people to understand.
Yeah, I don't know if I know the answer. Like, I think, like for to a degree, like it was a mourning process. Like it really was. Like I was giving up on a dream. I was saying, okay, you've done all this work for this amount of time, and it's kind of like not nothing. It hadn't amounted to nothing. I still had incredible opportunities, some highs, but it wasn't what I had set out to achieve. And I think I was so lucky that I had stuck with my education in the background, because if I hadn't had that, and if I hadn't gotten into, and I got very lucky, got into a job that I really loved right off the back of that with Hexus, and David Dunn, my boss at the time, they made that transition from playing into being a professional, I suppose, in my other spaces a lot easier.
Yeah.
And then I guess kind of a fake it till you make it, really. Like it was very much a thing of I just had to get through the part where I was letting the dream go, you know. I don't know if I really succeeded in that because I'm back playing, but like the opportunities just started coming back once I enjoyed it again.
I think the key thing is it's okay to change your mind. Sometimes when we make decisions we feel like, oh, what will people think if we go back on that decision, but it's okay to change your mind, because you're going to feel differently today to how you will this evening, to how you will tomorrow. So I think that's really important for people to understand, that it's okay.
I think it's like not every decision has to be a reflection of your identity either. Do you know, that kind of way of like, I sort of had this thing in my head that I'd like parked the rugby player a bit. Like I was still going to play, but I wasn't going to be this competitor anymore. That was sort of I still wanted to be good. Like I'm too competitive to ever say that I don't care. No, I always wanted to win. But I guess I had maybe started to try and say that I didn't want to go as far as I actually wanted to go.
It's nearly like a yin yoga teacher said before, when I was in a yin yoga class, and she explained that yin is the feminine and everything, and we were holding a pose, and she said, just let everything go, and sometimes less effort achieves more. Definitely. And I just thought what you're describing there seems like that you just let go and said, I'm just going to play, and it's resulted in you nearly achieving more. It's a paradox, really.
Yeah, it is. It is. And I think, like, obviously the circumstances I was in changed. So like I was playing sort of a different sport now, going back to 15s, and but it was like I relaxed into it. I was having the time of my life. I was having a great time because there was no pressure on it. There was pressure in the terms of like, when you show up for a team, you have to show up 100%. And I like training, so I always trained pretty hard. But like we'd go out for pints, like there was no tomorrow after games. And like that was not part of my lifestyle before that when I was playing, elite. But it was very much of then stuff just started happening again. And I think the identity piece, I realised the identity piece wasn't really about being a rugby player that achieved X, Y, and Z. And it's hard to acknowledge that sometimes, because it still is for me personally. But I think what I've found is that actually what people recognised in me was the drive to work and the drive to do my best for the group and for myself in situations that ended up being far more important than...
So you're like the essence of who
Yeah.
you are.
Yeah, so that became the identity, and that it's still something that drives me now, is how do I lean into that piece, and make sure that I'm a dependable teammate, because that actually might be the thing that gets us to our results, as opposed to just striving to win, you know?
It's the real intrinsic motivation as opposed to the extrinsic.
Yeah.
And in terms of the women's game, I mean, there's been, if you look at since the women's game has been around, like you look at the progress in the last number of years, like it's really sped up in terms of progress. If you were to fast forward 10 years, where would you like the women's game to be, both from the support to grow, but also from the support externally? How do we build up the support for the women's team to levels that we see the men's game at?
I guess, like, for years, the biggest problem has been just the volume of people playing. So, like, it's so cliche, but it starts like ground up. You have to have girls playing from 5, 6, 7, whatever it is. Now, I don't condone people like pigeonholing, like, you know, don't put your kid into one sport. That's not what I'm saying. Just get girls playing. The more athletic and the more involved in teams or individual sports, but the community of sport in general, the better. Because that's, like, you see loads of men's players, you know, they had really successful careers as GA players, and then they just chose rugby because they were supported in their athletic development, supported in how to be a really high achieving athlete. And
probably felt that connection that you described earlier as well.
Such a huge connection piece. Their identity is being kind of, you know, like reinforced all the time, and there's a space for them, and there's never any question of, well, what's the next step, because it's so clear. And that doesn't mean there's not hardship. Like, there's so many disappointments. I'm sure there's tenfold disappointed men's players as there is women's players, because there's 10 times the competition. But the difference is the pathway and the platforms are there for them. If they again hit the right timing and don't end up competing at the exact same time as like the best player in the world or whatever it is, there is no reason that they shouldn't get to an elite level. Whereas you have girls that they might want to play rugby still in this country, and it's not possible in their local community, and if they don't have a parent that can put in a huge amount of hours driving them to a further club. So it's those little details, I think, it's, you know, the pathways are coming along big time. We have these kind of structures for girls to play in now, which is huge. They didn't exist 15 years ago. So we are coming on leaps and bounds, and it's fantastic. Like, I was down at a session in Ballincollig 2 nights ago with the under-14s girls team, and they're starting their cup campaign against Ennis, and they're so excited. When I was playing, there was no women's team in Ballincollig, full stop. Never mind an under-14s with a full team out ready to play in a cup. That tournament didn't exist. So for me, it's the volunteers first off, the coaches, a lot of times parents that put in so many hours to make sure that those girls have a structured competition to play in, a place to go every week where they can express themselves, you know, how competitive they are, or just how much they want to be part of a team environment, but also staying fit and healthy. And
we lose so many people
thing.
around 13, 14 years of age, both women and men, from sports. Because there's other distractions, social lives, and, you know, relationships and things. But
and I think people don't get supported in being competitive sometimes as well, especially girls. I find that it's like, it's almost not cool to be competitive, or to be
potentially not feminine.
Yeah, exactly. Not as a teenage girl, like, or at least that was what I felt sometimes. It was definitely like almost seen as like an aggressive trait. That's not what it does at all. Like,
what would so I mean, from what you're saying there, like the pathways, the support from grassroots up is really, really important. And what would you say to any of our listeners or parents of kids now, girls that are playing sports, in terms of, like, you know, a call to action for rugby into the future? what would you say to people to drive it on now from here?
Support. Time spent, I think, is like, I got spoilt with time as a kid.
Yeah.
My parents drove me to everything that they could, and I think that's, I was very privileged in that sense, in that my parents had the time to do that for me. But if you have the time, put it in.
Yeah.
And get involved, but without being pushy, I suppose. It's like a fine balance, isn't it, of like, sometimes kids aren't going to want to go to sessions.
Yeah.
Knowing where and I'm not a parent, so I don't know how difficult it is, but I know from coaching there's days where there's parents that have dragged kids down to a session.
Yeah.
And they never want to be there at the first 10 minutes, and then they get into it and they forget that they didn't want to be there at all.
Yeah.
It's supporting them to find, I suppose, what they enjoy, but pushing them a little bit to say, like, if you've said you want to be part of a team and you've committed to this, that's an important commitment you've made. That's an important decision you've made.
Yeah.
And I think there's so many lessons outside of just, well, the primary thing for me is keep kids fit and healthy.
Yeah.
Keep them fit and healthy. They will naturally be inclined to stay going when they feel good playing.
Yeah.
Where
and it's the groundwork for
it's
the
so
future,
important
for
life,
adulthood.
like, yeah. But then nurture that competitive element. And some kids aren't competitive, but they still like playing. You got to nurture that too. So finding the right environment for them, I suppose, or the right sport, or it doesn't have to be a sport, just active. And then for rugby or team sports predominantly, or more specifically, you've got to nurture that goal setting, and that, like, if you want to go for it, it is going to be tough. You have to make sacrifices. You have to show up. But I will do everything I can to support you in getting you to that point. And it sounds very dramatic, but I think those were things for me. Like, I remember losing like a race or something. I was doing a little bit of athletics when I was a kid, and it was at Abbey Oaks. Her mum had gone to the Olympics, and I lost races to her every year in the school games for years. And I always came home crying about it. And my mum was like, but you still ran the race, like, and you still got to run the next race.
Yeah.
And like, I did. And then I ended up in other sports, and it was the same thing of like these disappointments that you come back with home, and it's like, okay, and that is very disappointing, and we'll absolutely deal with that, and we'll figure out what went wrong, or, we'll get a McDonald's and it'll be okay. But you're going to go back to training next week.
Yeah. It's like the life skills that you learn outside of the school system, really, isn't it? Yeah.
Big time, yeah.
The question I ask all of my guests here is that I believe every woman embodies high performance. What do you think, and why?
I think to varying degrees, probably. Like, I do believe there are challenges women face that societally are still there, and to overcome them in itself is impressive. And especially high achievers, I guess there's maybe more obstacles because you've set yourself up on a path that's going to be more challenging, more competition. It's tougher to get through some of those obstacles. I think, like, there's varying levels of high performance then as well. There's definitely, and it's from team environments as well, like you see people that rise to the challenge, and you see people that find ways out of the challenge.
Okay.
But to get to a certain point at all is probably an achievement. I think when you're really competitive and you're dealing with lots of different people and lots of different types of mindsets and lots of different types of competition, it is hard to always see everyone as high performance.
Yeah.
Especially when they have an impact potentially on how you go.
Everybody,
like, but yeah, I do think there is an element of that, especially, like, it's the same in sport, but I think societally in general, things are improving all the time, but that doesn't mean that we should settle for how they are, or that, there's an element of, God, I'm grateful that it isn't what it was 40 years ago.
Yeah.
But I still want it to be better.
Yeah.
And I think we get kind of almost gaslit into thinking we're being greedy when we say things like that. And I certainly do, in the environments we're in, like, not to be like a complainer, but and I think that's the thing, you get called a complainer, you get called negative, but really what you're just doing is, I want it to be better for the next group of girls coming along. I don't want them to have a period of time where there wasn't an under 12s team for them to play on. I don't want them to be the first generation of X to have whatever. It should just, that should just be a prerequisite. Like, so I do agree with the statement. I think then, as it becomes more specific to maybe things that are having an impact on me, I'm maybe less likely or less inclined to
objectively
agree.
speaking, but subjectively speaking. And what 3 life lessons would you have for our listeners from your experiences over the years?
I think that the big one that I touched on, and that definitely has been part of my growing up, I suppose, is the staying connected to your supports. For me, the primary people in that were my family, who I'm so grateful for, especially my mum. She was just incredible and still is. And then it's surrounding yourself with people that are going to push you. So push you in the right direction, I think. And it was a piece of advice my mum gave me. You put yourself into scenarios where you are surrounded by people that you want to be like, or who are aspiring to achieve the same things as you are, and who are willing to put in the same work. Yeah. And that can be hard sometimes, especially as you're younger, like picking ambition over what's cool, I think sometimes was, you know, like you didn't get to go out as much, still get those comments around, oh, she's not having a pint again, whatever. And I like my pints, but like, you know, sometimes you just make the decision to not do it.
Picking ambition over what's cool. That's,
and picking kind over cool as well, I think, is the other big one for me. Of like, competition can sometimes push you into a nasty place, and that's definitely been a learning for me. Over the last few years, like especially getting like older within the squad, and my coaches hate when I say that I'm this like old person in there, but like I'm older comparatively to some of the new girls in. But that I've definitely learned to channel my frustrations, or I'm trying to learn to channel my frustrations more constructively. I think the other big one that I've been working on probably in the last 2 years, and in the last 4 months really, is that you can be kind to yourself without being easy on yourself. So there's a way of self-talk that is going to push you on to perform without telling you that it's a failure if you don't.
Yeah, because when you're talking about the competition can be nasty, and what you've said throughout is that the biggest competition at times is yourself. Yeah. That's a really important point. Yeah. Is that you need to be kind to yourself to develop. What's an example of that? What does that look like?
Probably recognizing when you've taken on too much. That's been one for me, of like, it's okay to not deliver sometimes. Like, not to not deliver where you're letting someone down. That's like, I hate doing that. I hate failing in a way that impacts somebody else. But I think having open and honest conversations with people to say, I can deliver this, or I can't, or I'm sorry, I'm gonna fail on that one. And being able to say, and I think this comes back on, if you put yourself in a position that was irresponsible to put yourself in, that's on you. You can be hard on yourself in the reflection on it and be like, that was stupid. I should have known better. I've learned from situations like this before, and I haven't adapted. But you can be kind to yourself at the same time and go, I didn't do that with bad intention. Yeah. I did it with good intention. It was just probably too much. That one would be like taking on work outside of my training hours and things like that. I have, and then you know, the work ends up being in time that I should be recovering or sleeping or like taking a bit of downtime. And kind of going back on that and going, that was dumb. Yeah, you know, like, and that's still something that I struggle with now, because opportunities are so much fun, and then you feel like you're missing out on stuff if you're not doing it all, but like you just can't do it all. Yeah.
And any books that you've read recently or over the years that you'd recommend to our listeners?
I'm not a great, well, I used to be a good reader, but I'm not so much anymore. I think one that stuck with me from the philosophy degree. It's called The Body Keeps the Score.
Oh yeah.
Bessel van der Kolk. And that was more just around, I think it opened my eyes to understanding people a lot more, and probably myself too, and having a lot more empathy, I think, for you know, like that when competition gets nasty, recognizing that some people's way of coping with those scenarios is very different to your own. And however harsh you're being, they're probably being 10 times harsher. You know, or like when I've failed to achieve something, or more so when I've let other people down, I take that very, very much to heart. And there's reasons for that. So the Van der Kolk book was interesting to me because it kind of went through how childhood really has a significant influence on that. And it actually just made me reflect on, again, how lucky I am, but not everybody is that lucky. And I think when you get to high pressure situations, being aware, for me anyway, that not everybody had the same experience as you, and that, like, that's a quite extreme book because it's about like trauma and like the serious sides of trauma, and the kind of literally physiological impacts it can have on people's lives. But you just, you know, on a kind of higher level, simpler overview of that, you just have no idea what's going on with other people. And high pressure environments bring out all sorts of batty coping mechanisms and reactions from people. And it's like, as I've gotten more into leadership kind of roles, it's recognizing that. And I'm definitely not the best at doing that. I'm a hard edge a lot of the time, but softening that a lot of the time is actually the answer.
Well, it sounds like you have a good awareness of it, so that you're leading
reflectively, maybe.
It's a growing edge.
It's a growing edge.
And then what other high performing women should I be speaking to here on the podcast, and why?
Yeah, I guess probably a lot of people that I just admire are in my sporting environments that I've been in. So the girls that come to mind are leaders, with Sam Monaghan and co-captain Adele Tricky McMahon. So they're the two 15s captains at the moment. I've played with Tricky for years here and there. She kind of had a similar route to me. I remember sitting in a hotel. We were roommates before a Six Nations campaign, and we both knew we weren't going, so we were booking our airline tickets to go over and watch the girls play. Even like this was pre-selection, but we just were in the same headspace. And then Lucy Mulhall is the captain of the women's sevens team, so would have been my captain for a number of years. And she has, along with a number of other members of that squad, I don't think I've ever seen perseverance like it, and dedication, and an ability to go to the highest level of performance. Now, these are the elite of the elite. They've been hammering at the door for nearly 11 years, and they've finally gotten their Olympic qualification this year. So I think those three women, for sure, are, for me, what high performance looks like. And they embody, I think, all of the really important, genuine kind of behind the achievement pieces of high performance as well.
I just think you're truly inspiring, an absolutely Trojan worker, and I wish you all the best with your recovery from your ACL injury.
Thanks
and I really can't express my appreciation enough for coming on the High Performance Woman podcast. So
thank you
very much.
Thanks very much. Thanks a million. I enjoyed that, actually.
I really hope you enjoyed today's episode. You can join the High Performance Woman tribe by subscribing, liking and sharing podcasts with your friends and family, and by following me at High Performance Woman on Instagram and TikTok. I'll see you next time.